Hello everybody, I'm Matt Anderson and welcome to The Road Not Taken, how ordinary people got out of their way and you can too. I'm delighted to introduce our guest today, who is Peter Braxton, the director at Envoy, a management-owned private office headquartered in Minnesota. Prior to that, he was a graduate of the US Air Force Academy, and on his first day of work after training was 9/11, 2001, and Peter's air refueling jet, the KC-10A, was the first military jet over New York City that fateful morning. His scheduled 5-hour flight turned into a 17-hour combat air patrol mission over Manhattan. He subsequently deployed to the Middle East 8 times over the next 5 years, then went on to work at Credit Suisse in private banking, then was a tech entrepreneur who started a company using dynamic pricing software and algorithms for small businesses to maximize value for perishable goods. And in present day, as I said, is the director of a management-owned private family office that represents over 30 families and a total balance sheet of $3.5 billion. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
This is awesome. So great. So yeah, tons of different things I'm excited to talk to you about. But I'm going to start off sort of with the focus piece around sort of adversity, because obviously all of us have had our challenges. For you, what's perhaps been the most useful thing in terms of times when you've had to get out of your own way or handle adversity?
Sure. I mean, the Air Force Academy certainly prepares young men and women to face significant amounts of stress and adversity. I used to have a saying, if adversity doesn't, quote unquote, kill you, it will pull people closer. When I was at, going to war, we call it downrange in the Middle East, the people you go through and you face adverse situations with become kind of partners, friends, for life, and you kind of look back on those moments, if you survive them, fondly, of course. And of course, there are other parts of adversity that do bring people down, because survival doesn't necessarily mean death. Of course, it means could mean an altered state.
So, but in terms of like what's helped you get out of your own way, so you're saying that the training you had in the Air Force Academy is what helped you the most, as far as kind of toughening you up and preparing you for almost anything?
I'd like to credit that. I really would. But, I think the true credit belongs to my parents. I think they were both committed to raising myself and my brothers in a way that we'd be just productive members of society. When I was 15, my father, he sat me down. He said, you should serve this country before you enjoy this country. You'll always look back on your service fondly. I was 15 years old. I really didn't know what he was talking about, but he was right. I do look back on my service fondly. And conversely, I think my mother, she raised me to be a person that would fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves, right? And so these characteristics of kind of service before self, which are core values to the Air Force, were instilled in me long before the military.
And just remind me again, so your parents, sounds like they're very patriotic, but were they born in different countries, weren't they, or not?
So I'm half Korean, I'm half African American. Actually, I did that Ancestry.com. I'm actually a little bit Irish, believe it or not. Okay. But my father was born in West Virginia. Okay. And my mother was actually born in South Korea. So they met when my father was in the military himself. Mm-hmm. And yes, you're right. My father did draw significant benefit and experience from his time in the military. I remember him telling me when I was young that he was deathly afraid of getting on an airplane. Well, he joined the Air Force, right? You're going to get on an airplane. He didn't want to go to Korea. Ended up meeting my mom and told me it was the best decision he ever made. Right? Everyone kind of has those inflection points or moments in their lives where they have some hesitation, they're reticent about something, but without guidance, again, my parents were my guiding light. You kind of maybe make the easier choice, or the choice that your initial instinct says that you should make. In reality, you should make the hard choice, and the hard choice you always grow from that.
So I'm curious about the topic of courage, because obviously that helps us do more and be more. When you join the military, is that something that would you say your courage quotient sort of builds over time?
I would love to say it's courage, but it's more derived from confidence. And confidence, of course, is derived from good training. The military does, a lot of things A couple things mediocre, some things poorly. I like to say the things that they do well is they're very, very good at training young people to take on a tremendous amount of responsibility very quickly. So going back to my kind of pilot training story, my 9/11 story, I was 23 years old at the time. I had just graduated from the program that Saturday, and my first day of work after training, like fully qualified, was 9/11/2001. It was my first day of work. I was fully qualified to fly that jet over New York City during 9/11, which turned out to be a combat mission. But I was ready to do it. They trained me to do it. That confidence gave me the courage, if you will, to perform my job. And hopefully it was flawlessly. We all make mistakes, but you learn from them.
So talk about that day. I mean, in terms of when you, because presumably when you woke up, you had no idea what was going to happen. Is that correct?
Not just presumably. I don't think anyone in America, really knew what was going to happen. I think I woke up. Go ahead.
So what did you think was going to happen that day? I mean, in other words, what were you preparing for on this first day out of training, and then what happened next?
Great question. So on your first day of work in the Air Force, when you're flying a new plane, it's actually called your dollar ride, and you're supposed to bring $1 to the instructor pilot that flies with you. And I had $1. I had a kind of a silver coin dollar that I was going to give to this person. The person I was flying with, colloquially, call sign, whatever you want to call it, we called him the Silver Fox. He was a colonel. I was 23 years old, second lieutenant. I promise you, any second lieutenant in any military is deathly afraid of any type of colonel. Looking back today, I'm 41 years old. That colonel was probably 44, 45 years old, not much older than me. My friends, my peers today are colonels. But then I was scared. I was scared of this guy. And because he was, he had a kind of reputation for taking the new guys out. And he called me Green Bean, right? I think he called everybody Green Bean that was new, but he called me Green Bean that day. I'll never forget it. He was kind, but he was tough and strict, and obviously he was trying to continue my education and continue my training. I woke up around 4:45 or maybe even earlier, 4 a.m., got to McGuire Air Force Base, New Jersey. My first flight, I think the takeoff time was maybe 5:45 or 6 a.m. We took off, coasted out over the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Atlantic City, where we did some practice maneuvers. That was my expectation. We were going to, and that's how it was briefed. We were going to go up with another KC-10, practice air refueling, do some maneuvers, change position, fly formation, and then come back for what we call pattern work, which is touch and goes at McGuire Air Force Base or Atlantic City, and then come back before noon. We were going to be home before lunch. I remember that part of the briefing. I remember that because I didn't bring any food. I didn't really bring any water.
Oh, wow.
And we didn't have any. Right around, I think it was a little before 9 a.m., we got a call from NORAD, North American Aerospace Defense, who called our aircraft and asked for our state, which is a fancy way of saying, what is your status? How much fuel do you have on board? How many souls? Is your aircraft fully operational? What is your location? I remember I answered that question erroneously, and the colonel, the Silver Fox, he transferred aircraft control to myself. He took the radios and answered that question flawlessly. It goes something like this. It's been a while since I've been in the military, but, Team 22, Angels 26, heading 040, 4 souls on board, 140 fuel, fully operational, right? They want to know if the air refueling capability of the aircraft is in any way impaired or not. And we were fully operational that day. We then received instructions to proceed direct to JFK, John F. Kennedy Airport, and enter into a holding pattern over the airport, at which point they directed us to contact New York Center at whatever frequency they were on. I remember the colonel did that, and New York Center gave us what's called pilot discretion, 5 to 50,000 feet. That is all of the airspace over New York City. I can't really overemphasize enough, because that's the inflection point where it dawned on me that something was terribly wrong. For New York, and this was unscheduled, what we were doing. So at that point, the colonel turns to me and says, "Peter, I think someone detonated a nuclear weapon somewhere in the United States."
Oh my God.
Of course. I remember thinking that's not funny. I don't know why you would say something like that. But he knew something was terribly wrong. Much more experienced and wise than my first day of your work. This person was in the military for 22 to 25 years. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, it took us probably about 23 minutes to get from our position to John F. Kennedy Airport. We entered into the holding pattern. I was fully trained to do that. I did it perfectly, as I recall. And I look out the window, and I saw Lower Manhattan. Now, I'm from upstate New York originally, a town called Rome, New York, outside of Syracuse, New York. And I'm very familiar with the tri-state area in New York City. I have family in Queens, New York, and Bedford Hills today. So I know the geography. And I just remember thinking, my gosh, I did not know New York City was in this like a seismic zone. I thought it was an earthquake. Well,
oh wow.
My last vivid memory of something going terribly wrong, quote unquote, on TV was I think it was the '89 World Series between the Oakland A's and the San Francisco Giants. There was an earthquake during that World Series, and they stopped the game. I mean, they kind of halted the game or canceled the game, and everybody, the bridges were collapsing, the city was kind of on fire. I just kind of thought that's what might have happened. You got to remember, we don't have any video or TVs in the cockpit of an airplane at that time. This was 2001. This is pre Facebook, pre Skype, pre all these interesting internet tools that we have. And so all we had were our radios and communication. So of course, your next obvious question is, did they tell you what happened? They didn't. They did not tell us what happened. We asked. They said they don't. Well, they couldn't confirm. And they didn't want to speculate. And certainly that's where the training kind of kicks in, because I like to tell maybe our audience today, if you've ever seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, in the beginning of the movie, they're searching for Private Ryan, but they find the wrong one. They tell this young soldier that his brother has been killed in action, and that they need to. And the soldier, I remember in the movie, he's like, "Well, my brother, I just saw him. He's 13 years old." Well, they found the wrong Private Ryan. Let's pretend for a second, rewind back in time, that either Command Post or New York Center, somebody told us that the World Trade Center had been attacked by terrorist groups and the towers had collapsed. What if my brother was in that tower? What if my father or mother was in that tower? And how can I operate this instrument of national power properly with that type of information? So of course they're going to try to kind of sterilize the environment and make sure that the reason that we were kind of trained and hired to go forth as airmen in the military would be to execute the mission as described or proposed, and be flexible enough to be able to do that if something happens during a training event like it did that day. So they didn't tell us what happened, but I do remember all the fighters from the Otis Air National Guard and Atlantic City Air National Guard that were responding they were on alert, they were responding to the New York tragedy. I refueled all of those fighters that were deployed, kind of rapidly deployed from those bases. We spent, countless hours over in New York City, kind of speculating, of course, in the cockpit. We had no idea what was going on, but we didn't truly find out until we landed.
It's crazy. Almost
1 a.m.
Wow.
Next morning at McGuire, which is only 47 or whatever miles as the crow flies from the city, and then learned about the terrible tragedy that happened.
And you did all of this without any food or water?
Well, to your point, presumably nobody knew. We didn't know.
Yeah.
I was supposed to be back by lunch to debrief and then grab a meal. Typically, a training sortie is maybe 6 hours, 8 at the most.
Yeah.
Operational sortie where we're moving cargo or moving aircraft can be 10 to 12, maybe 14 hours. And then maybe a combat sortie I've seen as high as 17 to 19 hours of flying. In some cases we're augmented, but in many we're not. So no food, no water, but that's what we're trained to do. We're trained to be soldiers and not complain about these things and not get upset, not let that interfere with the mission.
I've got to ask about fear. I mean, you're going from a training day to being in combat and not knowing what's going on, but you must have sensed something horrible had happened. How do you respond to something like that? I mean, in other words, do your guts just go loose right away, or is that something you'd experience somehow enough through training that, I don't know, you kind of had some kind of autopilot response? I'm curious. I've never been in anything like that.
I can only say that had I not been so well trained or so confident, that I probably fear might have taken over. I knew something had happened. It was surreal. Over in New York City on that day, our job was to force extend, which is to transfer fuel and save time, energy, and expense for sister and coalition aircraft, which is what we did. I have plenty of war stories of being maybe shot at over, Afghanistan. That I don't think we have time to talk about those moments of fear.
Yeah.
People describe flying as, hours of boredom followed by moments of sheer terror.
Yeah.
That could be because of an engine fire or hydraulic leak or some type of decompression. Well, in combat, you add the elements of the enemy trying to eliminate their threat, which is us. And certainly I've been a threat to the enemy forces over Afghanistan, and they shot at me.
Mm-hmm.
That's confirmed. I can confirm that. And the fear there is just lightning that goes through you, but if you're still alive after 7 or 11 seconds, it kind of passes and it will descend off of you, and you'll continue to, if you're well trained, of course, to execute the mission.
Mm-hmm.
And do your job.
How do you I've got two things going through my head. The first one is sort of adjusting to civilian life when you've had those kinds of adrenaline, terror experiences. What's the hardest part about civilian life after you've had that kind of life for a number of years?
That is an incredible question. The military does an incredible job of indoctrinating you into their culture, right? Believe it or not, maybe you know this, maybe you don't. You sign away a lot of rights, maybe freedom of speech, freedom of protest when you join the military. What the military does not do a terribly good job of is re-indoctrinating you back into the civilian world. Mm-hmm. Now, are they incentivized to do that? We could debate about that. I would say they are incentivized to do that because we are still ambassadors of the military, and they want us to represent that institution purely, if you will. But they do not do a good job of kind of re-indoctrinating you into the civilian world, which is materially different. It is a different culture out here. I was lucky enough to have an older brother. Mm-hmm. He was also in the military and also a civilian. He's a neurosurgeon. Actually, he's the only neurosurgeon in Eagle and Summit County, Colorado today. But he's always been, part mentor, part brother. I hate to kind of say it, but a part father figure. He kind of looked at me as somebody that needed guidance. And I found a lot of re-indoctrination into the civilian world, lessons from him. But I was also fortunate enough, of course, to go to business school. Business school for me was the ideal place for me to go to kind of learn some of the vocabulary that I would need to prepare me for a new career in something else. But for me, especially, it was critical. It was a really, really, really responsible and thoughtful decision that I made to go back to school, get educated, get retrained, if you will, and that served as my transition out of the military into the civilian world, and it really served itself well.
That's interesting. So the retraining or reindoctrination was a lot of that. The credit of that goes to business school, or to having a different education in a different world. Is that what you're saying?
I am, but people in the military wouldn't even really come to mind as an option. So somebody has to advise you to do that, and the advice that you're getting is something, the source you have to trust. That source of advice. That's one of the things I do in my present job at the family office is give advice and execute on that advice. But again, they have to trust the source of that advice and my experience, having worked in family offices for years, to properly guide very affluent, sophisticated wealth situations for families. So, business school was a great transition point for me to leave the military. But the advice I got to even study for the GMAT and apply to certain schools was even more critical, if you will.
I want to come back to the highs part, though, because this is, well, it'll make some sense. So my grandparents lived through World War II, and all my memories of them in terms of when they got most animated is when they talked about the war, and especially, when Coventry, my hometown, was, it was literally leveled during the war, so, it was constantly being bombed. But I don't want to use the word euphoric because that's not the right word, but that sort of, I suppose, the adrenaline rush and the emotional highs and lows of that, it always seemed like the rest of their life after that was really rather flat by comparison, and the best they could do was to talk about, holidays they'd been on. But when they, to see them most animated, it was always when they talked about the war. And again, I'm sort of relaying that. I would imagine one of the struggles is when you've been in, especially when you've been in combat, to come back and presumably also to be around, I would imagine 98% or more of people who have absolutely no idea the world you've seen, and sort of again how you, I don't know, either how you replicate that for yourself to find equal excitement, or to come to terms with the fact that that's not how most people on the planet live. I don't know, but can you talk about that?
Well, I think what you're really talking about might be in part like risk tolerance, right? So how is your envelope for your tolerance of risk expanded by your life experiences, right? And I assure you that having deployed 8 times to the Middle East and seen what I've done and been exposed to it has increased my envelope for what risk, either personal to threat to life and limb means, or even risk when it comes to like career or economics or future potential means to me. I don't miss war. War is a very ugly thing. It's a necessary evil in a lot of cases, and I do support. And I am a citizen soldier, and I still kind of consider myself one. But I don't miss that. As far as the adrenaline is concerned, you can figure out ways to do that. Like I still fly jets. I fly private jets. I call it more of a hobby because I have a full-time job at the family office. I used to play squash, which is a good stress reliever until my my knees kind of gave out. It's a pretty intense sport. And, golf, whatever. But I don't feel the need to go subject myself to undue risk for no reason. The way I look at risk is I mitigate risk in life to the best of my ability, but I still execute. Right? There are people that will mitigate risk and then choose, hey, I can't do it. Not going to jump. Not going to go take the chance or leap with my career or faith. I mitigate the risk. I do given the information that I have at the present time, will do my very best to mitigate the risk, but I still need to make a decision. I learned that probably as a behavior from being a pilot. The worst decision is no decision. The best decision is the right decision, and the middle decision is the wrong decision, but at least we figured out very quickly that was wrong, and we can correct it. You cannot correct a no decision, and planes do not pull over to the side of the road, if you will. They keep going. So you've really got to plan ahead, stay ahead of the jet, and it's kind of a way of thinking, if you will, a way of thinking. I do get to apply that in some aspects of my life, but it also draws into focus very quickly what is truly important and what is not important, right? To get upset over or get upset about. To your point earlier, not a lot of stuff bugs me out here. I don't get road rage. I don't get upset waiting in line or if somebody cuts the line. I see a lot of people do that. And I have friends and of course family that don't really think the same way. And of course in my mind I'm like, you just need a couple weeks at boot camp, or you just need one deployment. It would change your attitude about like how woe is me, or how the pity party, right? Just don't have time or energy for that. um, when you're kind of serving your country in a combat zone. So yeah, it shapes who I am. It shapes how I respond to stress, or if stress can make me respond to it at all. And to your point, I have not seen many things in life that really kind of measure up to the type of lightning stress and burden, the heavy burden of responsibility for men and women's lives as an officer in the United States Air Force. But it has certainly prepared me probably to be a very productive member of society.
Is it fair to say that your experiences helped you mold you an attitude that therefore you were a lot less intimidated by things that typically intimidate others? And where I'm going with this is, I mean, again, and correct me if I'm wrong, so you spend time during your week consulting to billionaires, is that correct? Giving them suggestions on things that they should do, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And just for the purposes of the audience as well, can you give kind of a short, like a list of the types of things that you consult billionaires on?
Sure. So
just
people
briefly,
who create,
yeah.
Sure, very briefly. So people who create vast amounts of wealth typically do that by hiring or renting the best people possible. There's a couple of ways to do that. I'll try to be as brief as possible here. It's either by charisma or by kind of economics, right? So you can lead people to do a job and create more value than they kind of take home, and you take the rest of it, the delta we call it, right? Or you can pay people a tremendous amount of money to create a tremendous amount of value, and then extra value is a bigger kind of risk or game on the bet on the people. You can take that delta and take that home for yourself. If you do that and repeat that process often enough, I don't care what it is, in hedge funds or making widgets or glass or selling soda, if you do that often enough for a long enough time, and balance your balance sheet and understand your cash flow, so you don't get into a position where you can't continue to afford to do that. I'm trying to break this down in simple terms. Mm-hmm. If you do that long enough, you will become a very wealthy person. The problem is, when you become a wealthy person, you also become a wealthy family in some way, shape, or form. And there are other people that you may or may not, in your mind, think you have obligations to take care of, give them money, create trust for them, take care of your grandchildren. What we do is not deal with the family business. We consult and advise on the business of the family. Once that liquidity experience is kind of approached or achieved, there is now a situation where you have to do something, right? You have to deploy your capital, or you cannot deploy your capital, but is that what you would have done in your business? Is just, okay, let's stop making widgets, let's just hide because we're afraid. Going back to your earlier point, there is nothing that I'm afraid of. There's no fear that I have. Maybe it's irrational. I'm not afraid or fear anything. Certainly, I know I'm mortal, right? I know at one point I'm going to die. I'm going to get sick. I know the people that I love that are around me it's going to happen. There's a certain amount of things that I can control in my life. There's a certain amount of faith that I have to put into the process, whatever it is. And I don't cross those over, right? I don't try to control things that I cannot control. And I don't spend time or energy, because it's wasted time or energy trying to do that. It doesn't happen.
So what advice do you have for others then that will want to be more fearless but aren't going to have the opportunity to fight in a combat zone and train with the military? I know I'm oversimplifying, but I'm just curious. I mean, because obviously anyone listening to this will be like, wow, I wish that's how I felt.
Great question. So there's a lot of quotes that they teach you in the military, maybe that you hear anecdotally. One of the quotes that I live by, there's no limit to the good you can do if you don't care who gets the credit. I'll say that again. There's no limit to the good you can do if you don't care who gets the credit. Now, look, we're all in competition, whether it's for food as siblings, right, or fighting over toys, or everywhere you go, you will stratify. But I have found, as a personal philosophy, that the best way to deal with the externalities of the world is if I ignore the credit part. Like, if I don't really care who gets the credit, I guess think about that statement. There really is no limit to the good you can do. Now, my advice to other people, and again, I don't mean to make this sound pejorative, because a lot of people have very different and difficult circumstances. But my advice is just to think, well, hey, it could be much worse. Grandmothers, they're always famous for saying, this too shall pass. There's wisdom in that, right? It could be much worse. I have seen situations that are much worse than my condition has ever been in my life. I'm thankful that I don't have to experience that, but certainly empathetic and sympathetic to that. Mm-hmm. And I think kind of waking up like that gives me the charge and the energy and the motivation and the passion to make the most of what I have been given. Right? It's important. It's all, your altitude is determined by your attitude, right? We can keep going on. Character is defined by what people, meeting people that can do nothing for you. Like, what they do for you, they can do you can do nothing for them, right? But that's kind of true character. And so I really kind of think about going through my day or my life with those attitudes, and that kind of keeps an uplift, or that moment of lift that Melinda Gates was talking about, that lift under my wings.
And then I'm curious again, I want to go back to the question I had, which I guess you've sort of answered, about not being intimidated by billionaires, when, I mean, that's a far cry from what you grew up with. Is that right? Economically?
That's correct. Yeah. No, it's absolutely not. And still do not have. I don't want to.
But to feel, confident enough to tell people like that what you recommend and expect them to follow through, how do you, how come you don't have an imposter syndrome at times? Like, how have you handled that? Or
imposter syndrome,
feeling like you don't really belong as the person that's giving advice to such wealthy people?
Okay, so on the wealthy people side, it's interesting. There is no finishing school or graduate school to teach people what they need to do or know that exists on the earth. You have to learn by experience, right? And so, typically you don't get better at anything without practice. So I don't have imposter syndrome because I know my advice and consultation is correct, because A, I have no dog in the fight. I have no conflict of interest when it comes to these people. They're paying me for my advice. They're not paying me for a product. They're not even really paying me for a service. They just want to know what they should do. Now, if they tell me, hey, furthermore, you told me what I should do. I've explored all my options. I trust you. Go execute on that advice, right? I have nothing else to sell them. Besides myself, mm-hmm. I'm interviewing on behalf of my firm. That's what I really do on a daily basis, is educate and interview. So when it comes down to it, I've seen the current business model and how it is kind of created to generate vast amounts of wealth on the backs of these wealthy people. And in my opinion, this is mine, that's not what a family office should be doing. It's not a profit center. It's an administrative hub. It's where all this information and complexity and risk goes to be kind of digested, and then an outcome comes out of it. In a profit center, I don't know, a hedge fund, a private equity firm, a investment firm where they get paid by commission, or they get paid by carried interest, or they get paid by a promoter performance fee. Well, that's a profit center. And that means you're in conflict with the person you're saying you're helping or advising, and that's where I kind of take umbrage with that position, if that makes any sense. So I know from my experience and the people that I deal with, they're just regular people. They manage to find some repeatable process that they've done at an expert level and created vast amounts of wealth. But they've never built this type of business of the family. They built a family business, not a business of the family. To those who recognize that this is a different skill set, there's a different vocabulary, there's a different type of personnel or people that you have to kind of deal with or manage, those people find great appreciation for finding a team of people who will help them with the things that they do not know. They know what they do not know.
Okay. Actually, it just prompts a question. Are there any common traits that you see amongst the billionaires that have you saying to yourself, okay, this is why these people have made the kind of money they have?
Sure. There's only one. There's a tremendous personal sacrifice that all of them make. I don't care if it's sleep, a relationship with a daughter or a spouse or a parent. I don't care if it's holidays. They sacrifice a tremendous amount of things that normal people are kind of like groomed not to sacrifice. Okay? I love my sleep. But if I want to make create that type of value, I'm going to have to sacrifice my sleep. It could be a relationship. Some people, they need you at home, helping with the kids. Some people make that sacrifice because they think the greater result will help the kids more in the future. The problem therein results from this delayed gratification where they then think, I don't have to help these people. I made the sacrifice because of them. Maybe it was false. I don't really have to help them anymore because they didn't appreciate that sacrifice. So I don't have to, right? So there's a little bit of a disconnect there. That's kind of getting in your own way for some of these wealthy individuals, right? And so my job is to really codify that they're subjective individuals in this decision making, not objective. I am objective. I am agnostic. At the end of the day, I talk in terms of possibility. I talk in terms of probability. I certainly understand that there are financial assets that these people deal with and non-financial assets that they deal with. They're both critically important, right? But that's where my advice kind of comes from.
That's interesting, but you're saying that you don't think there's any other common denominators between them in terms of desire, hard work?
You're looking for a common denominator. I think that's the greatest one. There's some sacrifice. The sacrifice starts either at an early age or they get, we could talk about anger, right? So people that are trying to fix things, right? They're upset about a process. Why? When I started my dynamic pricing company, my question was, how can you tell who in this line, in this queue, is willing to pay more for that seat or access to that thing or that food or that meal now? You can't tell unless you give them the option to buy their way out of it, right? It doesn't matter if you're a billionaire, if you're just a poor college student. Each person might pay $500 to skip the line and go to that Cubs playoff game. Who knows what it is, right? So I was kind of angry at that process, right? I was like, why isn't there a solution to this? And that's something that I tried to solve. I think, the people that create this type of value make a tremendous sacrifice. They're upset at a process and they think they can do a better job. They either by charisma or by economics are able to hire or rent the best people possible to help them along that journey. There's a variety of things. It's not one simple answer. Yeah. But when it comes down to it, man, they all make a sacrifice.
That's interesting. And then I want to go back now to your journey, because obviously it's hardly a kind of a logical route that you've taken to go from flying jets to consulting with billionaires. So how do you explain that to yourself in terms of kind of connecting the dots so that it makes sense as to why you are doing what you're doing now?
Sure. That's a great question, and it's very existential. Let's go back to the military. Well, what part of the military did I really enjoy? Do I really kind of look back fondly on? I was an instructor pilot. I instructed the other instructor pilots, right? So not just the new pilots that came from pilot training, but the pilots then upgrade to aircraft commander and then upgrade to instructor. And my job, the job that I liked at least, was instructing the instructor. There's a discourse and a debate there that is mutual. It's a two-way street. It's not like a unidirectional learning that you do in the military as an instructor pilot of instructors, right? Think Top Gun, if you will, for the movie. Here, I'm a student of wealth creation, right? I'm a student of what wealth is and can do. In my opinion, the only thing there's two things that the wealthy people kind of quote unquote have that others do not. One, they get to design their own job. Right? Everyone's got to do something between the hours of 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. and be productive members of society, but they just kind of have to do it and figure it out and find your own way. Wealthy people tend to be able to design their own job. The problem therein lies is that there's no such thing as completely avoiding the bad parts of every job. Every job has a bad part of it that someone's got to do. I like to tell people, my job in the family office is being nothing more than a nanny for your money, the same way that you hire a nanny for your kids, right? And the number one important trait that you have to have for that nanny for your kids is trust, blind, unequivocal trust, right? Now, my job in the family office world is to say, hey, you have to trust me. If your end goal is to have this type of life or this type of lifestyle for you and the people you care about most, this is the way you do it. This is the order. There is a method to doing that, right? That trust.
How do you establish trust with people like
Gosh, that's a great question. I have found that establishing trust requires you to expose yourself, right? Expose your weaknesses. Take down the wall. Do not, if you have imposter syndrome, tell them you have imposter syndrome. Just be honest. Just, say what you're going to do and do what you're going to say. I have learned that unmet expectations is the root of all conflict. Communicated or not. If you have an expectation that your food in the restaurant will be delivered to you hot and it is not, your expectation is not met, there's conflict. We could apply that to mother-daughter relationships, brother-brother relationships, pedestrian to cop relationships. Unmet expectations is the root of all conflict. So, trust, you just have to be consistent. You have to have integrity. You have to be credible. You certainly have to be kind, and you have to earn people's respect. What I have found in my business dealings is that I give respect immediately. You don't have to earn it from me. I just give it to you. If you fail at it, well, then I get to kind of take it away for whatever reason you fail at it. But you don't have to earn it from me, right? And I find that I get along with people who just, they trust me, they respect me quickly, and then guess what? I don't let them down. And if I don't let them down and I follow through and do what I say and say what I do, I don't have to worry about that. That's not a stress for me, is that, I'm going to lose the respect or trust of somebody. Does that make sense?
It does. And it's funny because on one level, I don't know the billionaire demographic. My sense is that the stereotype is of sort of quirky personality types that, or I don't know, just somehow are difficult to explain because they're so unusual. Then, although, is it fair to say that the people you do work with are they kind of ordinary people on many levels, or do they have sort of such unusual quirks that you sort of have to, either build that expertise over time in terms of knowing how to work with people like that? Are they eccentric or actually mostly similar, just as you said, sort of aced one particular part of their life in terms of accumulating wealth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you're going back to your old question, which is, what do they all have in common? I can't say that they all have quirks in common or that they're ordinary people. Okay, they make a tremendous sacrifice. They're able to motivate people to work for and with and alongside them, and to create vast amounts of value, and then they extract the value via contract or whatever contract or relationship that they have. I have met very quirky people. I have met very eccentric people. I have met people who are hermits that are very, very, very wealthy. They don't interact well with society. They're not really participants in society. They all need help. They all need advice. They, the person that says, "Oh man, I did this all myself on my own back. I made the sacrifice. No one else made a sacrifice. It was me." That does not make for me a good client. That is the type of client that I fire. These are people that do not want to listen to my advice, no matter what. It's kind of like, You come up to the cockpit of the plane. You ask where we're going. I tell you, how can we? I'm flying the jet. And you're like, no, let me do it. You go back there. You go sit in the back. I'm going to go fly the jet. Okay. You're welcome to do that as long as I have a parachute to get off this jet. Right? Because I know you don't have the training. You have no exposure to this. You've never done it before. To the people who admit that and they're thankful, hey, thanks for getting me here on time, on safe, on budget. That's the type of people you want to work with. I cannot tell you what common threads besides the ones I've already talked about that these people have. They're ordinary people. They have children. They get sick. They have ambition. They want to do things. They want to solve problems. They want to sleep. They want to rest. They want to eat. They're all different.
And I think maybe the reason I was going that way is because a week or two ago I interviewed someone about the top producers in our industry. And unlike other people, she said, actually, no, this is not a typical demographic that you're going to see represented in the rest of the population. These are people that have an unusual sense of purpose, unusual drive, unusual work ethic. They typically take much better care of their bodies than most people. So it was kind of interesting that she actually not bristled, but kind of very much stated that. And she actually said something like, you can see the discipline in their eyes. So comments that I sometimes hear, but not all of them all in one fell swoop. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of maybe where I was sort of going, just out of curiosity, really, and also to see.
I wish that was my same experience. Yeah. I see they're ordinary people are billionaires because they're born, right? I mean, what kind of drive or passion does it require to be born? They inherit the money, or they get divorced. I mean, look at the Bezos situation, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that Mackenzie Bezos was not driven or doesn't take real care of her body, right? But she's a billionaire for sure, right? Mm-hmm. One of the wealthiest people in the world. I'm not taking umbrage with that statement. I'm saying in order to create that value, you have to make a tremendous sacrifice. I think Jeff Bezos made a tremendous sacrifice or took a tremendous risk that normal people wouldn't do. Right. He was able to hire and motivate people who have a technical expertise in computing and coding that he had no idea, but he was able to motivate them, or he was able to pay them to create a process that's repeatable. He aced that process. Mm-hmm. He's continuing to do that today, right?
So
go ahead.
What do you like best then about the role that you have at the moment?
Going back to the instructor pilot thing, I am able to educate the instructor, mm-hmm. right? The person who has created the wealth, who wants a educated and thoughtful discourse with somebody who's experienced and has a skill set and something that they either admire or don't have. And they appreciate that about me. Mm-hmm. That's really cool to have a job like that.
Yeah. Do you see other future business opportunities in what you're learning at the moment? Or is that sort of to be determined?
That's a great question. So for me, as an entrepreneur, my drive comes from solving problems that I know I can solve, or I can solve better than anyone else. The question is, what problem do I see out there that needs fixing and needs fixing by me? Mm-hmm. Right? When I look at what I do now in the family office space, it's a very young industry, to be honest with you. Law has been around since the beginning of time. And medicine, people have been getting sick since the beginning of time. Let's go back to the nanny example. Children have been born from the beginning of time. The wealthiest among us, this creation of this vast amounts of wealth, is a recent phenomenon. It's only been around for 40 or 50 years. Before that, there were probably, 22 people, not just in the country, but in the world, that had this type of kind of wealth, right? Mm-hmm. The problem with wealthy people is they have a very different set of problems, right? Very different set. If the wealth is going to outlive you, if it's going to, no matter what you do, and if you're prudent, well, then what can you do with it? Well, you could bury yourself with it like a Egyptian, right? Like a pharaoh. Mm-hmm. You can spend it on stuff. I promise you will run out of stuff to buy. You can give it away, or you can give it to your kids. That's about it. Name something else you can do, right? So the question is, how best or efficient or optimally do you want to do all of those things? Let's forget about the pharaoh one, right, and burying yourself with it, because that's kind of out of fashion, but you can do it, I guess. You can figure out a way to do it. I don't help with that part. Mm-hmm. I help these people become stewards of capital, stewards of capital, better stewards of capital, right? There are people that are terrible stewards of capital and resource. They create tremendous amounts and they're terrible stewards at it. If you want to be a terrible steward, don't contact me. If you want to be a good steward or an expert steward, that's when you reach out.
Interesting. Just a few questions to sort of wrap things up. Who would you say you've become as a person since that day that you were flying over New York City on 9/11 and who you are today?
I've tried to become a productive member of society. I've tried to become a tremendous, husband and brother and son. My wife is pregnant now. She's at 24 weeks, so Congrats. We're expecting this August. I hope to be a tremendous father and continue to be a tremendous friend to others. But, we're here to participate and engage with others. Remember, there's no limit to the good you can do if you don't care who gets the credit. I try to live my daily life like that. I do not need the tremendous vast amounts of wealth that I consult on. That's not something that really drives me. It doesn't drive me. To be honest with you, Matt, I'm lucky to be here today. I shouldn't even be here. I should have been blown out of the sky, decades ago. But I want to be a tremendous member of society. I want to comment on things that I have experience with or have seen for myself. I try not to comment on things or have an opinion on something that I haven't, experienced or seen myself, because how much validation is there from that type of opinion? Maybe not too much. We can all debate that, but I try not to comment on things that I don't have experience with. So I just want to be a productive person. I'm enjoying my life. I really couldn't ask for anything else than I currently have, and I'm just pleased as punch to be able to chat with you today about it.
No, thank you so much. And so all these thoughts are going through my head, and I won't bring any of them up because we'll be here for another hour. But I do have two more quick questions, or one's a quick question for sure. So in terms of people, I guess, whether it's doing more good by not worrying about taking the credit or, I guess, getting out of their own way, what do you think is a good first step for people? In other words, something specific people could do, in the next day or two?
I think it all comes from confidence, right? How is that developed, or how is that built? If we look at our greatest sports stars, or we look at people we emulate, they are some way, shape, reason, or form confident in their own ability to overcome the greatest obstacles that bring them down in their lives, right? By concentrating on their attitude. I think confidence is developed through repetition and practice, right? I mean, Malcolm Gladwell has written entire volumes of books about confidence. Ray Dalio talks about principles, and one of them is confidence, right? Not hubris, right? Not arrogance, but understanding that you have a rightful place in this world. You have rights, and you have application of talent and energy. And if you concentrate that in a specific position, no matter what you do, you'll be happy. I have a personal definition of happiness. Happiness involves two things. One, it's good health, and two, it's graciousness, right? So I have seen unhealthy people be unhappy. Okay, I've seen that. I have never seen someone who is gracious that isn't happy. By definition, if you're thankful, if you're gracious, you're by definition happy. The rest of it, I promise you, is ancillary, right? It just kind of comes or goes, fades into your life or disappears. I'm 41 years old. I'll be 42 this October. My career may change again. It may shift directions again. Who knows? I've just benefited in my life by saying yes to more things than saying no to more things. And I have said no to things, but I've benefited more from saying yes. So I try to say yes. And again, thanks for the invitation to come talk to you.
Well, I also wonder if if after billionaires, it's politicians or world leaders that you enjoy giving counsel to, but I don't know if those will be topics you'd yet need to master differently. Just thinking out loud.
My advice to them: There's no limit to the good you can do if you don't care who gets the credit. I think our politicians and our leaders in life, if they're true leaders and true politicians and leaders of people, should not care about the credit.
Yeah.
I think our system is built that they care so much about the credit. If you watch the debates this fall or on TV, you're going to start to learn a lot of people take a lot of credit for things that they truly care about. They care about credit. That's my advice to them.
I got one more question other than follow up. So I've been reading a book, or I was reading a book a lot last year. It's called The Big Leap. And basically the premise of the book is that most people never do the thing that they really want to do the most in life because they're afraid that if they do, then and they fail at it, that it would be too painful to go to their grave with that experience. What do you say to that?
I say to that, I thought about this very question without even reading the book. I think people, either from observation or story or even direct experience terrible things that happen. Failures. These failures, these things that happen, tend to be the brightest things in their mind, but in my opinion, the most third standard deviation event, right? Like, it's just not probable that this will keep happening like that, right? Whatever it is, I don't know what it is. They take that experience and rely on that bright failure rather than concentrate on the entire rest of we call it the area under the curve, right? All of the rest of the data points are the things that can happen that did not result in travesty or failure. I tend to think, hey, those failures are going to be part of life, but they're not that often. It doesn't happen that often, especially if you practice, especially if you train, especially if you build up that confidence and courage from the successes, and then concentrate on those. Forget about the failures. There's nothing really to be derived from that but contrition and regret. Learn quickly, but then leave it alone. Move on. If you do that, you'll be able to take that big leap, and that big leap will not be a big leap. It'll just be a small step.
That's awesome. Hey, Peter, thank you. That was absolutely fantastic. And then lastly, how can people keep in touch with you?
Sure. I can be found on LinkedIn. My last name is Peter Braxton. A lot of people will reach out that way. I'm happy to get back to you. I accept as many requests to contact me. I have great new friendships from complete strangers from the other side of the country and world. I am obviously busy. I'm going to be a new father here coming up this fall. Be very patient with me. I don't mind if you check or ping in, or if you don't hear from me in a week or two to kind of remind me. I think that's the greatest way for an audience like this to contact me. It's Peter Braxton on LinkedIn.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Peter. This has been really fascinating. And it's been cool too, because it's been a slightly different topic, or topics in some ways, than what I typically talk about. But you did a great job of weaving everything back into principles that other people can apply in terms of getting out of their own way. So lots to think about. So thank you so much. And then listeners, again, the most important thing is taking at least one specific step that's action oriented, whether it's around the repetition and practice that builds confidence, or some of the mindsets, or the piece about there's no limits to what you can do if you don't worry about taking the credit for it, and kind of getting our egos out of the way. Numerous different things that have come up that I think all of us can apply in our own lives as well. And I think another big takeaway for me was around perspective, which obviously we all have different perspectives on things, but I think it's one of the things I notice about people that have been able to achieve remarkable things is maybe they have had a different perspective that some of us haven't had, but therefore that's a reminder to all of us to seek out different perspectives so that we can approach things in a happier way, or a more grateful way as well, and then make a bigger impact without getting too stuck in our own little bubble. So anyway, need to wrap things up here, but thanks again, listeners. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast already, please do, or to the YouTube channel, please do. And show notes are on matt-anderson.com, matt-anderson.com. And of course, for this particular show, it will be /Peter Braxton. And otherwise, I'll wrap things up with my favorite question is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I'm Matt Anderson, and this is The Road Not Taken.